Good afternoon. I'm Pamela Hughes, Senior Director of Philanthropic Engagement here at IAS, and I am delighted to welcome you to our first Friends Lunch with a Member talk of the new year. Our speaker today is Gilles Bransbourg, 2024-25 Infosys member in the School of Historical Studies. After winning the French nationwide Concours Général Award in History at the age of 17, Gilles went on to study economics, mathematics, and statistics in Paris, at Lycée Louis le Grand, École Polytechnique, Sciences Po, and École nationale de la statistique de l'administration économique from 1983 to 1990, and sincere apologies for my awful French accent. He became a market economist, then specialized in financial derivatives and held executive positions in the banking sector until 2005, when he decided to step down in order to engage fully with his lifelong passion, history. By 2010, he completed a PhD in history at École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, and then joined NYU's Institute for the Study of the Ancient World in 2009, first as a visiting research scholar and then research associate since 2012. And then in addition, the American Numismatic Society in 2011 in the curatorial department. From 2019 to 2024, just last year, Gilles was executive director of the American Numismatic Society in New York. His research deals with comparative economic and monetary history from the ancient to the contemporary world. He's published extensively in a range of academic journals, conference proceedings, and books, and he's a frequent contributor to academic colloquium and conferences. At the Institute this year, he will be pursuing the completion of a monograph titled Roman Imperial Economics. This is a fun fact. In 2015, Gilles was made a knight in the French Order of the Palme Académique. With the French consulate in New York, he has contributed to the establishment of an English-French dual language curriculum in New York public schools. So now please join me in welcoming Gilles Bransbourg for a talk, Coin or Not to Coin, Why Did the Greeks Bother to Create Coinage? The talk will comprise 2 sections with a chance for questions in between. Very good. Thank you.
Okay, wow. That was me. Well, you'll have to bear my French, French accentuated English as a retaliation for, actually she did pretty well, knowing that these French institutions have long names, École nationale de la statistique et de l'administration économique, who would give such names? Anyway, so today we're going to deal with a pretty fundamental question, coin and not to coin. So why do we have, let's say, official money versus other type of mediums? Because coins or banknotes were not necessarily the most widespread form of money in history. So we're going to go back. There will be 2 sections. One mostly centered on Mesopotamia, and the next one mostly centered on Greece. I'm not dealing with the East Asian history of money, because China, India have got independent traditions that I'm not dealing with. We need to, otherwise we'll be here, past the evening. So why did we move into coins at some point in history? Because in the distant past, in the Near East and Egypt and the Mediterranean world, people used what we call from German Hack silver or Hack gold or Hack copper, which are fragments of metal that were weighed in order to transact or trade, which means that for thousands of years, people were pretty happy not to use coins at all. So why did we use coins at some point? So as Zita von Reden summarized almost 20 years ago, there are many explanations, none of them very convincing. So at least we know we're dealing with a serious topic. So the concept of money, I mean, this is Wikipedia. There's no AI in my presentation, I need to say, but this part is Wikipedia. What's money? Money, well, is something that allows to store wealth, trade. It needs to be fungible, divisible, portable, blah, 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 blah. I mean, you know what? I'm opening an open door here. But what we don't know about is the origin of money. And there are two very competing theories, knowing nobody witnessed when money started. So we left with, there are no written sources prior to the third millennium BCE. So we left to guess. The most ancient thesis about the start of money, which is supported by most economists, has been for the first time articulated by Aristotle. Money is there to facilitate trade. So once upon a time, there was barter, and then there was money, which allowed for the coincidence of a desire between the seller and the buyer. You have a cattle on one hand, but you can't use the cattle to make a coat, so you go to someone who killed a bear, and you buy the bear skin, and you sell a cattle. But what if it's summer, but you still need the coat one day? So money allows for the coincidence of desire, because you could trade something, keep the money, and use it later to buy what you need when you need it. So then you have the ethnologist thesis, which opposes the economist thesis, saying, well, and David Graeber expressed it very famously in depth the first 5,000 years, barter never existed. Ethnologists, anthropologists never encountered any primitive society with this type of bartering activity. It's a myth. And actually, money was created by the state. And going back to Mesopotamia, when we hear about money, we have temples and kings and administration, and they used silver as an accounting tool. So we're having these two very opposed theses. So let's look now at reality. Money was not necessarily metallic, and I've taken a range of examples, and the map on the upper right corner shows the geographic extension of a cowrie money, which is very impressive. It's the most international form of currency before metal, metal was already used in Eurasia, but the spread of cowries was much larger and much more standardized. Talking about the involvement of the state in the expansion of the use of money, you can notice there was no state involved. There was not a single state ruling the Indian Ocean from southern China to eastern Africa. So we're dealing with something which seems to be a much more embedded process that took place in diverse societies. Cocoa beans in the Aztec world, barley, wool, dates, copper, silver, gold in Mesopotamia, cattle, money in Rome, bars of salt in historical Ethiopia. There are many studies from the 17th, 18th, 19th century about the salt money that they transported throughout Ethiopia. And generally speaking, metallic object. Another question that economists and anthropologists ask is money something general, or is a monetary medium general purpose or not? Actually, it doesn't matter. What matters is that some medium can be used for some monetary use, and I will quote here Elon Hymans, who very rightly says it's not helpful to consider whether or not a monetary medium is global or not. What matters is that some of the monetary functions are using this medium. So now this is a simplified chronology. So there is from minus 3,000 to there is no year zero. There's a year -1 and a year 1. I know a book that puts the year 0. It doesn't exist. Um, he was a student of mine, actually. You are covering 3,000 years, Mesopotamia on the upper part of this kind of table. We start with accounting tablets. Then we see silver and weights. Weights are important because if you need to weigh something, you need standardized and official weights. And then the coins. And underneath, you see different culture, Phoenicians, Mycenaean, Greece, and so forth. So the material evidence about metallic money is overwhelming in Mesopotamia and Egypt. I will show, I'm not going to comment each slide, otherwise we will way exceed the time slot we're having today. But between cuneiform tablets, and let's remind that writing started in order to produce statements and accounting and ledgers. The first writing in the third millennium BCE are not about poetry. It's about accounting. Maybe some of you think accounting is a form of poetry, but that's another topic. But we have wealth of evidence about exchange and values and valuations between different mediums in early Mesopotamia. Interestingly, some of these testimonies appear in the Bible, and quite surprisingly, in the Hebrew Bible, the paragraphs that deal with financial transactions are extremely consistent with what we're seeing in Mesopotamian tablets, which speaks in favor of I'm not going to take a view on the authenticity of the Bible, obviously, but at least some of the sources are really ancient. There is no way these kind of sentences and paragraphs would have survived when the Bible was put in writing in 5th or 4th century BCE if there had not been a more ancient textual tradition supporting this, because it's consistent with what we're seeing on the tablets. So from the Near East and Egypt, it moves to Mycenaean Greece, and then to Europe. There are a luxury of evidence of bronze hoards of fragmented piece of metal, notably from Italy, and gold and silver, especially from Northern and Western Europe, so the Celtic world. In the Levant, we're seeing a luxury of evidence about hack silver hoards. And this map, which shows Israel and the Palestinian territories, points to quite a number of hoards. Unfortunately, we don't have many hoards from other countries in the Middle East, not that they did not exist, but the professional archaeology, or archaeology is not as well developed in Iraq or Syria than it is in Israel and the Palestinian territories, which is why most of the evidence come from this part of the Levant. So we're seeing here some weights. Many of them are inscribed. Many of them bear some seal of official authority, guaranteeing that the weights is what it is. And we know about fake weights, so weights that pretend to be this, but they're not. So very early on, counterfeiting and robbery and fraud are taking place. So more evidence about scales and weight. I'm using, Mycenaean, Cretan, Egypt. I mean, it's all over the place. These are some discoveries from Crete and the Mycenaean world. These ones are more recent. They date from the Roman period. So let's talk now about legal control. As soon as silver circulated alongside other mediums, I'm not saying silver was the only form of money. We have evidence about dates, barley, and other mediums being used for transactions. But by the first millennium BCE, silver imposes itself as the money medium par excellence. But before we're reaching the first millennium, there are surviving legal texts showing that the authorities are concerned about fraud. So like the Code of Hammurabi, that specifies weight standard. And what's important is in one of the text, and yes, it's actually the next one, it talks about a standard of weight which is implicit in some of the sentences which refer to an ordinance of the king. So these weights are not random. They are undertaken and guaranteed by the royal authorities. We think the same thing here with a code a little bit less known, the code of Ur-Nammu, late second millennium, where here we have explicitly the mention of the standardized 1 mina, and the king brings prosperity to his people, and not just prosperity, but equity. You're having social concerns here when he says at the end, the mighty man, so the man of the talent being a larger currency unit than the talent is bigger than the mina, is a smaller one. So what he's saying is that by guaranteeing the weight standard, he makes sure that the poor man won't be the victim of the wealthy man as a result of fraud, because the wealthy man has the ability to produce fake weights and hoard more silver, so he has the ability to practice fraud, and then the poor man is the last victim in the chain of transactions. So you're having this social concern and showing that monetary norms are here to protect citizens, the average person. It's fascinating to find this in second millennium text. So metallic quality and quantity become a major concern. I will show quickly different texts that show these legal sentences from royal authorities or talk about these legal concerns or references. So most of these texts are from the whether Neo-Assyrian or Neo-Babylonian. So we are across the first millennium BC, the first half of the first millennium. And we hear about sealed bags. So we hear about seals. And interestingly, these seals are not necessarily produced by the king of the temple. Sometimes they're produced by merchants. So one of the merchants here complained that he did not find what the seal was saying. So he returns the silver to the sender. Here we have a letter between two kings, an Egyptian pharaoh who apparently sent to another king a quantity of gold that was fake. So very interestingly here, we're seeing the Mesopotamian king melting down the gold and figuring out, oh, but that's not gold. There's copper with this or tin or something else. And it's pretty brutal because apparently it's like a 75% fraud from the pharaoh. So never trust the king. We have many more mentions of quality in Neo-Assyrian and Babylonian period. And some texts prove that these different quality of silver based on fineness circulated together, but at different use. So one of them is good for trade, another one is not good for trade. So good for something else, maybe for producing jewelries. The text talk about quality of alloys. So a 7/8, or there is 1/8 of base metal in precious metal. We find this in a number of Neo-Babylonian texts. And very interestingly, this translates into the regularly high quality of the silver that has been archaeologically retrieved throughout the Babylonian world. So I'm showing here different texts. The first one from Aramaic document from Egypt, because they were Hebrew mercenaries used by the Achaemenids, so the Persians in Egypt. So they produce Aramaic tablets because Aramaic was at that time the lingua franca of the Near East. And there are specific mentions about the silver quality. Now we find in here the different hoards from Cisjordan. So here Cisjordan is a generic term for whatever is west of the River Jordan. Most of the silver purity, fineness is above 95%. Now, the Babylonian horde from the Achaemenid period, so the Persians ruled the region between the 6th and the 4th century BC. Again, we're seeing very high, with one exception, earrings. So, yes, someone didn't give a nice gift to his wife, it looks. But with the exception of that pairs of earrings, everything is 95, 96% pure or more. So we're dealing with a system that works. There is very few adulterated or proof of adulterated silver. Most of that silver is very pure. Now, before we come to coinage, appear again in the Levant some objects, sealed bags that could be considered as the ancestor of coinage, because a sealed bag will say it's pure and this is that quantity. So by putting silver together in a piece of in a fabric, in a small bag, and then sealing the whole thing, it's a kind of pre-coinage object. About the Achaemenid rule of law, and I will end this section with this comment, the Persians, or the Persian Empire, has got, in classical teaching in the West, kind of bad press, because the Persians, after all, were defeated in Marathon and Salamine, and the Greeks saved Europe and freedom, liberty, and so on. But when you look further or deeper, you're looking at a pretty happy empire. There are very few revolts. The rule of law is undertaken by the authorities and the satrapal authorities. And the Persian state worked very perfectly, very fine, until Alexander the Great conquered it. So it's a very functional state, effectively, and apparently with happy people, because there are very few revolts, with the exception of the Egyptians. And what survived from textual evidence about the Achaemenid Empire is they stress the importance of law, the respect of law, and that the king is the warden of a legal system. And it spreads into money. And there is different evidence from, literary and from ancient sources that the Persian kings were very careful about the quality of the silver that circulated in their empire. And we have here more evidence from ancient tablets where they refer to the law of a king. And it's at some point, one of the texts is saying, well, you'd rather not break the law of a king. So one can imagine that the punishment were harsh. But unfortunately, the texts have disappeared. We don't know how this law was applied or what was the content of the law. What we know is that such legal system did exist. So I've ended with Mesopotamia. The second section will be about Greece. And I would suggest we take maybe a 5-10 minutes break for questions, if there are questions, before we move into the Greek world. So whether it's so clear or it's so boring, I don't know. Yes?
Depends upon the valuation of, cow versus wheat or something like that. Were there standards of weights that translated in that, or that came only after the coins came in?
No, we do have actually luxury of transactions showing relationships between all these mediums. So we know, and it's not stable over time. So between the third millennium and the first millennium BCE, we have actually evidence about silver inflation. So the price of, let's say, cattle or a measure of barley will tend to involve more and more silver as we move on. So there are relationships. They use different units for cattle, it's going to be one cattle. So it's 1, 2, 3, you just count. And actually, there is a tablet showing images of cattle and how they were teaching. Many of these tablets are actually school tablets. So the teacher will show his students how to add and multiply and using cattle symbol on the tablets for that purpose. For barley, the unit is a core, K-O-R, which is a certain number of liters. I forgot the exact equivalence, but it's a much larger unit than the shekel. So the shekel, which is the standard unit for silver, is about 8.35 grams. Then you get the mina and the talent, which are a certain number of shekels. But there are transactions or equivalences. The debates among historians is whether we're dealing with state prices, so something that was imposed by the temples and the king, saying, okay, this is, barley is so much in silver, or do we have market prices? And it's probably a combination of both. The state aims at using standardized values for the accounting system, especially since the people who work for the temples are compensated. They get food, they get supplies. So the temple needs a form of standardization to work out their accounting. But since we're seeing a loss of value with silver, we suspect that more supply of silver did have an impact on actual trading, because we're seeing as well private merchants involved in importing and exporting wool, silver, gold, tin, and so forth. There is no silver in Mesopotamia, so they need to buy it from somewhere. And the prices traders use then has an influence on the pricing transfer system that temples and kings use. So it's a combination of both.
So why did silver become the go-to metal for commerce?
Sorry, why?
Why did silver become the go-to metal, the metal of choice?
No, it's a very good question. It's probably a combination of limited availability. I stress both words are important. It needs to be available. If there's no silver, well, like there's almost no silver in China, so the Chinese never used silver until the 17th, 18th century. So you need availability. We need some degree of constraint on supply. If something is just too available, it has no value, which is why copper, which was a monetary metal at the beginning, lost value because there was just too much of it. Bronze. So we believe that silver, well, from the tablets, it seems silver came from two sources, sources in Anatolia and probably on the high plateau of Iran. But at the same time, the Phoenicians brought silver from southeast Spain. So, and we know about it, a combination of literary text and metallic isotopic analysis, which shows that some of the silver in the Levant has isotopic signature that's extremely consistent with the southeastern Iberian silver ores. So the Phoenician navigated the Mediterranean Sea from east to west to bring silver to the Near East.
Silver used to stem the fraud. I mean, you could basically assess the validity of a silver coin?
Well, we don't have coins yet here, but there were two ways there are two possible frauds. One is mix up silver with something else, which, like this pair of earrings that were showing with 15 or 16% silver. So you put something that's, tin or the metal that sort of looks silverish. Another way is the core being different from the outside. So you take a bronze core, then you use a bath of liquid silver. You basically bath the ingots into silver, and then there's a silver layer around, and then you sell it as silver, which is why we're seeing on archaic objects, we're seeing a lot of cuts, because users would check the content and with scissors cut inside and look at what there was. And there is plenty of archaeological evidence of core copper or core bronze objects with silver layers around, or gold. So why not gold? Because gold, at some point, gold was measure units or major monetary medium in Mesopotamia. Then it was replaced by silver, probably because the supply of gold was too limited and the value too high. The value was about 12 times silver at that time. So in order to do transactions, a very, very small piece of gold, a fragment of gold would have been enough for a large transaction. It's not very practical. With silver, you're using something bigger. It's just more practical to use.
Period of time that we're talking about, the level of technology that developed at that period of time. How did these nations and civilizations manage to achieve fairly consistent purity standards, refining these?
Yeah, again, it's a very, very good question. And we underestimated ancient technology for a very long time. And it seems that there were very advanced metallurgic techniques available to the Mesopotamian, Egyptian, the people from the region, starting in the 3rd millennium BCE, because we're having, let's say, accuracy in measurements that are striking, up to the fraction of a gram, up to 0.04 gram accuracy in some fragments we are seeing. Copulation was probably developed around the 8th or 7th century BCE, and they managed to separate the component of an alloy to figure out what was in the alloy. So metallurgy was actually pretty advanced, and more than what we thought it was in the 19th or the 20th century. So most of the discovery we're doing now point toward quite an advanced technology.
What do we know about the network? How many people are using this?
Could you repeat the question before we even?
Quick question about the network. So how many people are using back then?
How many people?
Yeah, like, is it like?
Oh, I don't know, hundreds of thousands. But now regarding the merchant network itself, most of the letters we have, so they are on tablets, come from the Neo-Assyrian period. The Assyrian Empire that covered most of the Near East had outposts near Anatolia, so modern Turkey. And from these outposts, they traded with the Anatolians, because that's where most of the precious metal came from. And we have quite a luxury of archives from these Neo-Assyrian trading centers involving a certain number of merchants. I can't tell you how many different names we're dealing with, probably a few dozens of names. But the spread of silver inside the Mesopotamian economy, the way it permeated, especially during the Neo-Babylonian period, so slightly late, so the Neo-Assyrian Empire is replaced by the Neo-Babylonian Empire. And by that time, the transaction we're seeing on text and tablets involve very small transactions, very small fraction of silver. There's a sense that silver trickled down into the entire social structure of the Neo-Babylonian society. So how many inhabitants did we have in Babylon at that time? Maybe 100,000 people. I don't know how many people there were in Babylon. But then take all the major cities in the area. Yeah, we're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people using silver. So maybe we should move to coins now. I'm looking at time is money. So why do we have coins? So this is the theory. The theory is always beautiful. Coins will reduce transaction cost because you don't need to weigh them anymore. You don't need to check the fineness. You count instead of waiving them. So it will help the economy, make the economy, more transactions, more prosperity, more economic growth, more everything. So this is let's say, the standard view about coins? Well, just by fun, I'm showing some of the weight measurement tools that people have been using since coinage exists. On the left-hand side, it's a Roman scale. And then from different paintings or artifacts, you're seeing the way people kept waving coins throughout the history of coinage or checking their content. Is this pure gold? Is this pure silver? So going back into the coinage period, I'm here in Athens. And during the Agora excavations conducted by John Kroll, they found 129 Greek silver coins. Out of them, 22 were plated, which is a 15% proportion, which is pretty high. The Roman historian and retired British Museum director, Andrew Burnett, went as far as saying that about half of the denarii found in excavation were fake. More recent surveys that have been published along the Danube and the Rhine borders of the Roman Empire point toward, let's say, 1/3 proportion of fake coins, depending on the location and the century. And some of the images here are showing actual fake coins. And you're seeing the cuts, the test cuts. Them on the screen, which shows that these coins were discarded after someone had checked them. So now we're looking at some hoards that have been discovered. So this one is a hoard from Taranto in southern Italy, mixing axe silver with coins, and look at the cuts. The users have been checking they were dealing with silver and not something else. This hoards from Egypt belongs to the American Numismatic Society. And again, we're seeing some cuts into the ingots and the coins. This is a much later mixed hoards from England, 5th century CE, this one mixing coins and metal, which shows, again, that the value of coins was dependent on the metal purity. Otherwise, it would not be mixed up with actual objects. So the ancients were very much aware of the issue that coins could be fake, which is why, for example, in Athens, there are mechanisms and inspectors in the Agora, both in Athens and in Piraeus, so the harbor of Athens, whose duty are to be available when people have concerns. So someone wants to buy me something, he gives me coins, I'm not sure. I'm going to go to the official in charge, the dokimastes, and I will ask him, are the coins real? And the coins, if not, will be discarded. The law doesn't say what's the punishment for the bearer of the fake coins. Actually, we have other evidence that the legal punishments were harsh. We are talking about the mint workers. So interesting, the fraud comes from inside. Fraud, it's always insiders. It's rarely random people. So the death penalty is applied for the mint workers that's in the 2nd century BCE, in Gyme, in Peloponnesus. We have the same testimony from Demosthenes, the 4th century Athenian politician, saying that the death penalty for adulterating silver was current at the time of Solon, so in the 5th century, sorry, in the 6th century. Then Diogenes the Cynic, the philosopher, well, his father himself were involved in fake coinage and were exiled for counterfeiting. Diogenes is famous for having told Alexander the Great to move because he would obscure the sun. When Alexander asked, "What do you want?" he said, "Well, just move." In the monetary pact, so second half of the 4th century BCE, between Mytilene and Phocaea, so in Asia Minor, again, the culprits are insiders and the death penalty is applied. These are ancient texts found on inscriptions. They're not literary testimonies that could be subject to interpretations. They are actual text. So let's move to Rome. And the Lex Cornelia from 81 BCE, published by the jurisconsult Paulus in the 3rd century CE, talks about counterfeit, washed, melted down, trimmed, damaged, or injured coins, aurei and argentei, so gold and silver. And look at the punishment. So the punishment depends on the social status of the frauder, the fraudsters. So honorable people will be deported to an island. And the less honorable people, so the commoners, will whether go to the mines or be sentenced to death, which shows that the mines were not much better than being sentenced to death. It was a slow death. And the slaves and freedmen will be crucified. So that's the ultimately the lowest form of punishment at the bottom of a social scale. Now, much later, 6th century CE, Constantinople, and in Constantinople in Egypt, we hear that bankers take a 12.5% fee to exchange gold coins against actual ingots or gold in order to account for underweight coins. But coins are not that underweight. It's not true. So they're taking a margin for translating metal against coin and vice versa. And the emperor is not happy about that. So why coin? I mean, if it's such a mess, why coin? And this will be, kind of the last section. I will quote Georges Lerider, the famous French historian of Greece, saying the Mesopotamians would not have kept trading with ingots if they had not been happy about it. So you see in two situations, it looks like the coinage world is kind of a mess, surrounded by fraud, whereas in Mesopotamia, we looked at the systems that looked to function pretty well. So why? And as David Shapps was saying, there was nothing that could be done with coins that could not be done with bullion. And I'm challenging the concept of lower transaction cost, because if you have so much fraud, then transaction costs are high. And if in 6th century Egypt, the money changer take 12.5% of your gold, and not silver or bronze, but of gold, in order to exchange something, it's a pretty high transaction cost. So at the beginning was electrum. This is the first coinage that we are seeing in Asia Minor, before silver. And with electrum, we have pretty good evidence that the reason why they started to use electrum was because of seigniorage. So the first motivation to produce coins was not about transaction cost or helping the economy or being nice to the citizens. It was about making money for the state. Because this, for a long time, people thought electrum was natural. You have a story about the river Pactolus, and you still find this in the range of history, book on history. Mistakes are viral. Somebody says something wrong, then it becomes a footnote in the next book and in the next book, and then it becomes the truth. Actually, electrum was an artificial alloy, and metallurgical analysis shows traces of copper and lead, which are consistent with the smelting process. So it's not natural. And the vertical bar in red is where electrum most likely traded, and the ellipse is where the content was for Lydia, for the kingdom. And then for the cities that minted electrum, it's all around the place. So such a variation with the gold content is not, it's not a marginal topic, because again, gold was 12 times more expensive than silver. So the state made money. Doesn't mean the state didn't know what they were doing. For example, when it's about adjusting weights, they're very good. This is an histogram of weight analysis of electrum coins. So they're strict with weights, but not with content. It tells you something. On top of this, we know that electrum was not an accounting metal. For example, the contemporary accounts of the Temple of Ephesus use silver and gold separately. So there was no reason to produce electrum. If we move now to archaic Greece, so the archaic period is defined as the 6th and mostly the 6th century, so late 7th, 6th century, early 5th century. Then we move into the classical period. The Greek coins do not travel inland to the east, with the exception of Egypt. But they're very much limited to the Delta region, the Levant, the coastal region of Asia Minor, Greece and southern Italy. So coins are a Greek phenomenon. And in Mesopotamia and elsewhere, they're still happy to use the previous form of money we spoke about. So what did the Greek what did the Greek think themselves? Why? They knew coins were invented at some point, and Herodotus was saying that the first people who invented coins was because of trade. And Plato says pretty much the same thing. Are they entirely wrong? Because what we're saying here is, wait a minute, silver was great, so you could have kept using silver and gold, you didn't have to produce coins. Did it help trade? Maybe not because of fraud. But the Greeks themselves are saying, no, coins were useful to trade. So looking at other ancient testimonies like Xenophon, we realize that the Greeks were aware that the coins from somewhere could not be used somewhere else. And I'll explain why. So coins were not conceived for international trading between Greek cities. We're dealing with about 200 Greek cities producing coins at that time. But they're not producing them to trade with one another. Otherwise, it would be the same weight standard. But we're dealing with about 12 different weight standards. So we need to think about what happens in a fragmented political landscape. And this is the most critical part of the thesis I'm suggesting today. The Persian Empire was one political unity. So if someone was giving you fraudulently something that person said was silver, you could appeal. You would go to a judge. And if the fraudster lived in another province of the Persian Empire, he would go through the satrapal administration to the next satrapal administration in the neighbor provinces, and he will go down through the legal system. So there were legal recourse against fraud. In Greece, it's nothing like this. If you are in Athens and you're getting fake silver from someone from Corinth, well, too bad. The Corinthian judge will not help an Athenian. They hate each other. Not just Corinth and Athens, but Aegina, Sparta. I mean, all these guys hate each other. So they won't help one of the citizens being sued by a citizen from another city. So you are limited to what you can do locally. And locally, the only way to ensure trust is to produce something that has been locally stamped and guaranteed. And we come to the question of coinage. So trust, the Greek know trust is something major. And in that quote from that I'm showing on that slide, for the sharing of resources arise out of trust, and accordingly, even if they are scarce, they still suffice because they are circulated. Whereas without it, so without trust, they would not suffice even in abundance. So the Greeks are very much aware. You could have a lot of something. If it's not trusted, it's useless. So that applies to coins. So we have evidence of early legislation that regulates what's acceptable, not acceptable. So here is some law from Eritrea or from the 6th century BC, and more evidence about hoards of fragmented metal that were tested. You're showing again this kind of cut in a fragment of metal. So what do coins offer? actually they offer traceability and a path for legal claims, because the coins will be produced locally. So if you have a problem, you go to the local judge. And if you want to fake them, most likely it will be an insider job. So it's going to be local. And the judge, if you know something's wrong, the civic authorities will try to figure out who was guilty. Remember the meat workers I was talking about before that are punishable by death. So coins are a product of the law. That's why the Greek called them nomisma, because nomen means custom. So it's a legal product, and it's the only way to ensure local trade. And I'm saying local trade, it's important because many of the coins, like 50 years ago, people thought the Greeks didn't produce small coins. They produced big ones, tetradrachms, status, coins of 10, 12, 14, 15 grams. Why? Because the small ones were not discovered archaeologically, or they were discarded, because at that time, archaeology didn't care about small things. Now we're more careful. And being more careful, we find many of the smaller ones, fractions. In the colophon hoard from Asia Minor, some coins, most of the coins are 0.21 of a gram standard. So a fifth of a gram, pretty small. I'm showing them on this slide with an histogram of the weight between the fragments and the coins, the right-hand side diagram showing the coins. So the authorities are concerned about local trade. I'm ending with a case of Aegina. So Aegina is a very peculiar case because Aegina was the most active trading hub of Greece before Athens came into existence or came into being what Athens would be. So you're dealing with the 6th century BC mostly. Aegina was very well located. You're seeing, the grain from the Black Sea, product from Egypt, from the Levant, from southern Italy and Macedonia. So it was perfectly located at the nexus of trading routes. And Aegina's coinage is widely spread in the region, even in some cases as far as Mesopotamia, which is rare. On the right-hand side, you're seeing some examples of Aegina's coins. We call them turtles because they're showing a turtle, a swimming turtle, obviously, a sea turtle. But there is no silver in Aegina. So where did the silver come from? Recent analysis of Aegina's coin silver showing that most of the silver came whether from Macedonia or from the Lavrian mines in Attica, so close to Athens. But we're seeing as well some silver from Gaul or Iberia. More interestingly, and the sentence you're seeing at the bottom of the slide is very important, there is little or no evidence for mixing of silver. This is critical because let's say you are in Aegina and silver comes, like silver coins, whatever. You melt the silver, you use it to mint coins. Then the coins would show mixing between the different sources of silver. And you would see isotopic signature, which would be a kind of average of a different mining resource in the region. It's not what you're seeing. What you're seeing is that coins concentrate in cohesive groups around known sources of silver from Macedonia, from the Lavrian, and from Asia Minor. So what it is saying is that Aegina imported silver in bulk, which shows that the Aeginan state had agency. We're dealing with a political decision here. We don't know the process. How did they do that? What was the agreement with the people who owned the silver from Macedonia? There is no surviving evidence about it. But the metallurgical analysis tells us these agreements existed. Otherwise, the isotopic signature of the coins would be all around the place and would not be consistent with these signatures from specific mining areas. So conclusion, coins are a product of political fragmentation. If you live in an imperial state where the rule of law is upheld and where you trust judges and where you have legal process to pursue your claims, then coins do not bring much. Think about the cost of producing coins. It's, you have to design the dies, then you have to melt to create planks of metal. Then you need to create consistent blanks which have the same weight. Then they have to be individually struck by people. It's expensive compared to having fragments of silver and gold. So it's a massive undertaking by the states. So why are the states doing it? They're doing it because without coins in a political fragmented situation, there would be no trade. And the authorities, the Greek authorities, are aware that trade brings them prosperity. So they need them. So we have much later evidence, I'm here in the 2nd century, that even in the 2nd century, when after Alexander's conquest in Mesopotamia, the locals still did not trust coins very much. And there is this fantastic text showing that the status of Demetrius have a different purchasing values than the status of Arsaces. On one hand, it's a Seleucid king. On the other hand, it's a Parthian king. Normally, they have the same weight standard. Normally, you're supposed to count these coins and not weigh them. Well, in Babylon, no, they don't take it. So they are weighing them. And Adam Smith, the founder of modern economics, was very much aware of these issues. And I took that quote from Adam Smith, who used biblical text, and being aware that in the ancient world, we would not count by tail, but people would weigh and check what they were dealing with. So coins are not something as evident as we think, like, okay, it's reducing transaction cost, it's superior, it's better. It's not necessarily better, it's different. Thank you for your time.
Yes, please. In the area north of the Roman Empire in the first half millennium of AD, were coins being circulated among the Germanic people? They didn't mint them themselves, presumably. Were they so accepted that after they overran the empire, they then went on minting coins, or did coins disappear for a while in the post-Roman period?
It's a complex question, and there is not a single answer. By Germanic, I know it's a kind of catch-all word. If we assume by Germanic, all the populations that lived east of the Rhine and north of Danube, the Dacian, for instance, Romanians today claim they descend from the Dacian. I don't want to say it's ludicrous, but I have good Romanian friends who would trash me for saying this. But the Dacians produced Roman denarii, which actually were better than Roman denarii, better silver alloy. So there are instances of coin production outside of the imperial or even the republican borders, because the Dacians started to imitate late republican denarii. Now, yes, we're seeing imperial coins circulating in what we call the Barbaricum. There is no evidence, there is some evidence for imitation, actually, but we're not always sure where they were produced. But they were probably a combination of genuine Roman coins and some production of imitation. Mostly from, at the time of the invasion in the 3rd century, there are lots of imitation from Gaul, for instance. But we're not always sure who was producing them. So it's a mixed picture. Now, we're not sure that the so-called Germans used coins for transactions where Romans did. Where some of them were paid because they were mercenaries. So the Romans kept employing Germans in their army. Then they received a salary, and when they were rich and retired, or relatively rich and retired, they're going back to where they came from with their coins. Did they use the coins for transaction? Probably not. They had more of a symbolic value, a status value as a status. I mean, I'm an important man, I've got these coins. And many of them are found with a hole, which shows they were worn as necklaces or bracelets. But we discover more and more Roman coins in the Barbaricum as far as Ukraine. So Roman coins did circulate very far, but probably not for trading. Now, during the invasion of the 4th and 5th century, especially the 5th century, the successor kingdoms, the Germans call that the Great Migration. As a French, I call that a Great Invasion. That's a matter of perspective. Once the Germans established themselves in the Western Empire, they produced coinage. So there was no interruption, and they produced imitative coinage, so emulating the imperial types and legends. Some of the legends become blurred. They make mistakes in Latin. So they say, we need some Latin lessons. But actually, some historians believe it was on purpose, that they didn't want to write exactly the Latin legend, but it was more a way to show that the coins were genuine, they were legal tender, but by not putting the actual Latin words, they were showing a kind of cultural independence. Again, we have no text talking about it, so we left with speculation. The coinage did not disappear, far from it. And when gold became more rare, so we are in the 7th century, then silver took over, because there were huge discovery of silver in southwest, in the Frankish kingdom, close to Bordeaux now. And thousands of tons of silver were extracted in order to produce the denier silver coinage of the Merovingian and Carolingian. So for a long time, we thought that the early Middle Age was a period of low monetary situation. Recent research tend to sort of mitigate it and say, no, not that much. Actually, the economy was always to some extent monetary, and probably more than we thought.
Might I impose on you to just share what you shared with me as a reflection on your time at the Institute this year?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I know there were more questions, but I'm still here. After we let people go, I'm available. Yeah, exactly. I've no time constraint, no train, no flight, no kid to pick up from the daycare. I'm past that period of my life. So, and no grandchildren yet. So good. Yes, no, it's. I have a kind of prepared sentence, but it comes from the heart, which is, yeah, it's the best period of my life here, of my academic life. I've never had such freedom to write and research since my doctoral year in Paris. So this place is absolutely privileged. And it is there because of people like you, obviously, so because of you. And on behalf of my colleagues, I'd like to express most sincere gratitude. And as a European person, I can say that institutions like these do not really exist in Europe. And the few of them that exist have American support, like the American Academy in Rome or in Berlin. So private generosity is not something Europeans do often, but it's different in the US. That's something I discovered here, and I'm most grateful. And one more thing I'd like to say, what's the purpose of being here? Because I know at the end of the day, I could lock myself in my office and write my book and end of story. Why do we have hundreds of scholars every year? Because there are actual cross-fertilization and communication when we learn from each other. And I want to take a very simple example, and I will finish with this. I have a Greek, well, Yanis, who is a Greek colleague, is a professor at Oxford. So I deal with Roman economic history. And then he goes on and he says, yeah, you have this Greek philosopher who wrote about economic management of an estate in the 1st century CE, and that's his name. Like who? Yeah. I said, no, never heard of this guy. Yeah, sure. Because he was, we know about him through Arabic translation. He was known to the Arabic world. So the Greek texts were lost. So in a classical education, so the type of education I received in France, which relies on Greek and Latin, the guy is nowhere. But now there's an entire book that I just ordered. I will go this afternoon to pick up the book from Princeton University. We have an agreement with the university, as you know. There's an entire book with a translation of this ancient writer, which brings a lot of perspective to the ancient economic thinking. And up to now, and up to last week, I had no idea the guy ever existed. So I think it sort of materialized why we're here. Thank you very much.